it's the 10th day of June 2026. Of course, it's a beautiful day to be alive, just like it is every day to be alive. And welcome to the newspaper headlines and analysis, where we get into the print and bring you stories that are shaping the nation across the newspapers. And this morning will be the same. The Punch newspaper is where I start with this morning. I'm Anu Uluwakmo Idogo. And starting from the Punch newspaper, one big story sits right on the front page of the Punch newspaper. Post-primary chaos worsens as INEC fixes candidate submission deadline. That is one story you might want to catch up on. Today on page 2 of the Punch newspaper, it's about post-primary chaos, worsening as INEC fixes candidate submission deadline. That is a conversation we've been following and tracking from when the timetable for the Independent National Electoral Commission was released, and then the eventualities of people coming to say, can we have something else? Can we change some part of it? But yes, this is the case as we have it on the Punch newspaper this morning. Also on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, Nigeria's foreign debt to hit $72.6 billion after 2027 polls. That's coming from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. In fact, One Nigeria just recently brought you that story on the news yesterday, that IMF gave a warning to Nigeria particularly, that they should be careful of a particular Abu Dhabi loan or so. And so that's a conversation as well, because we understand the debt situation in the country is abysmal. It's on the high side. It's even at the neck level, or maybe more than the neck region. But it is really swallowing up a lot of things. You understand how that you have to pay interest, and not just interest, you have to service the loans. And where is the money to service all of this is the conversation from that corner. But yes, many other stories are still represented on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. And I will go to Elumelu, appointed chairman of Seplat Energy. That's on the business side of things as well. You might want to check out that story as we have it on the Punch newspaper. Meanwhile, there was something that broke out yesterday that is of national interest. I know it's of interest to you as well as every other person listening or watching this morning, and that's about the project that the president has commissioned, and that is just a start of many commissioning according to them. If you listen to the conversation yesterday, you discover it wasn't just about one, it wasn't even about two, it was like a number of them, and some are still yet to come, but we keep our fingers crossed and see what becomes of that. Renewed Hope FCT, President Tinubu commissions aerial route in 5 Obafemi Awolowo Way from Life Camp Junction to RRIII. That's exactly the story as you have the commissioning, to the official commissioning of aerial road. Of course, that's exactly what you have. And yes, there's a kind of picture on the Punch newspaper as to what it was like before, and then you know what they say after it has been established. That's exactly also a thing you might want to check out, particularly on that story, to say the day 2 of the project from what it was before and what it is now as we speak. That is the conversation, right? And I take a swipe away from the Punch newspaper now to see what the Punch or the Guardian now has on the front page this morning. The Guardian has the story, household ration swap to charcoal, as cooking gas records 67% spike. That's on the Guardian newspaper this morning. Household ration swap to charcoal as cooking gas records 67% price hike. As you can see, right, the page 6 on the Guardian newspaper is where the story is. Of course, what would you expect if there's global oil price situation, if there's global shake-up in the oil industry and is affecting every nation, then you can as well think it will affect Nigeria. In fact, Nigeria is not the only country that has done this. Just after a month or two, or just barely a month after the whole crisis of the Strait of Hormuz and the closure and all of that happened, some countries, particularly the South Asian continent, came together and said, you know what, guys, what can we do? And I can recall that they had a lot of things that they said they wanted to do, particularly to have alternative sources of power, and that was one thing they did right. And I know it's not a bad thing for Nigeria to also look into. Some would say it's an archaic way, it's an old system of using charcoal, but whatever you have is what you use. If life throws you a lemon, then you make a lemonade out of it. I think that's exactly the situation. It's about improvising, it's about developing, it's about using the best things you have to get what you don't have, and all of that. So the conversation is still clear, because household ration swap to charcoal as cooking gas records 67% spike. It means a laudable thing to think about, because it means that we adapt And I think some have said that's also one of the problems we keep having in the country, because we feel we can always adapt, so we don't really put pressure on the people that should be put pressure on. We don't ask the right questions. We just want to, maybe just a few days we tweet, we come out on the street for just 1, 2, 3 days, and then we're back into the room tweeting. Because it means that if you believe your strength is in tweeting, I'm afraid we've seen what tweets have done in recent times. I mean, tweets are good, right? But there's more to that. I mean, people would say, even when you tweet, those people that will read it don't even care. They'll even be one of the people that will like your tweets and maybe just say something about it. But really, we need action. But much more so, it's not to incite maybe what they call industrial action, or blocking areas just because of a protest or something. But it's just the rightful way of doing things, particularly come 2027, the elections as fast approaching. And one thing you can do as a Nigerian citizen is to get yourself involved, get your your voters card, your permanent voters card, and then get. I don't think you should be partisan if you don't care to. But one thing is sure: be involved in the political situation of your country. Be involved in leadership succession in the country, because at the end of the day, it will fall back to you some way, somehow, in the sweet by and by, or in the nearest future. Whichever way, you always have a return of that. But yes, that's about that story. Court rulings threaten 2027 election. Timetable, that's INEC wants. Yeah, court rulings threaten 2027 election timetable, INEC wants. That's also the conversation we picked when we started this conversation today. Senate to consider single term for president, governors after 2027 polls. Yes, I saw the story yesterday, and the first thing that came to mind was, oh my goodness. Well, I think for some reason it's a good one, because you would say that according to what the plenary of the assembly said, they said, you know what, this is going to help, especially for people to focus on one term, because you have just one term to rule. So from the first day to the last day you're working, you're not concerned about politics. And I think it's something that I also kind of like want to pitch my tent with, because I've always said that politics is a distraction to governance in Nigeria. I've seen this in so many ways. Politics, the way it's being played, is a distraction to nation building. I'm not sure we are going to move from where we are right now if we continue with this practice of politics in Nigeria. How that one person does maybe barely just 3 years in office, and then the next 1 year is going to be about election, re-election, or anointing a candidate, and it's all a mess. We've seen what it's done to the country Nigeria, and what we're saying is, can we have it better? And I think that's not too much to ask for an average person, and that's one thing we're saying now. I mean, it's a good one to say, if you are a governor or if you are a president, have just one term. I do not know if the term is going to be maybe broadened or made to be about 6 years, from 4 to 6 years. That's also a conversation. But the point is, you have just one term and one chance to make a point, to make Nigeria better. And I think that's enough in a lot of ways. And that some would also say that maybe it's not good because I'm not sure. They would say that they are not sure that one term is enough to make a change in the country. But I beg to differ. How long does it take to make a change? And maybe if we have the right heads and the right hands, we don't just want to do politics for amassing wealth or getting fame. We really want to help the country, to more develop the nation and make Nigeria better. And I think that's one of the things we should consider right now. And I think it's a thumb up from me to the Senate, and then every other person involved in this particular shake-up. And I think I'm looking forward to this, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed and see what becomes of this in the sweet by and by. IMF backs Nigeria's reform progress once poverty, food insecurity may worsen. Also on the Guardian newspaper this morning, the Guardian has that story. And for one of time, I'll switch my focus away from the Guardian to the Nigerian News Direct this morning. Democracy Day is on the front page of Nigerian News Direct this morning, and it says Nigeria moving in the right direction despite pain of reforms. You want to know who said that? That's the SGF. That's George Akume has come out to say, you know what, Nigeria is moving in the right direction despite pain of reforms. Do you agree? If you agree, perhaps you can drop it in the comments. They say whether or not you agree. Let's see if that statement is in tandem with what you agree to as your reality wherever you're joining us from. And away from that now, President Tinubu approves 10 billion naira for emergency preparedness. That's the story you might want to catch up on. Yes, many countries are already doing a lot of things, on Nigeria as well, ensuring that the borders are secure, ensuring that everybody that comes from countries like Democratic Republic of Congo must have a quarantine system they go through, and some of them might need to do maybe examination and cross-examination as well to ensure that they do not carry the virus into the country. But since the president has now made the claims to say, you know what, 10 billion naira is going to go for emergency and some other plans, exigencies as well. But it is a development because we don't want a repeat of what happened during coronavirus. We don't want the spread of Ebola again in the country Nigeria, and this is a good way to stop that from happening. And that would take my focus now to the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning. And you want to know what Nigerian Tribune has on the front page this morning. It says, under my watch, 1,859 families have accessed 128 billion naira for housing. Who said that? That's the president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, coming out to say this time around that under my watch, 1,859 families have accessed 128 billion naira for housing. Are you part of the 1,859 families? Well, if you know anybody, just drop it in the comments as well. Let's have a conversation, because some would say, is it to some people or is it to the generality of the Nigerian people? But the case, I don't have access to this, but perhaps I'll just ask a few persons if they do. Maybe Mr. Toby or Dr. Amos can tell us if they have all the ways to get this access, because everybody needs housing at the end of the day. And we know the population is increasing by the day, so we need more structures, infrastructures, housing systems for the country, for people to be able to put their heads in the country, Nigeria. INEC fully recognizes Wike-backed PDP National Working Committee. One development from the other. The PDP in different situations, like a roller coaster. If it rolls to this side where there is sun, it lightens up. If it rolls to the other side where there's no sun, it darkens up. And it seems the situation with PDP is still unfolding. And of course, one thing we will do, and we are doing, is keep our fingers crossed and keep tabs on every and many of these stories making the rounds. Moving on from that story and conversation as well, still to check on stories that are making the rounds across the newspapers this morning. The Daily Times is where I will land, and this time around it speaks of Falano, and that's about 2027 election, I guess. Falano raises red flag, least insecurity, attacks on free speech, hunger as threat to democracy. That is a big conversation everybody's talking about. Democracy Day is just June 12th, and it's just 2 days from now. And you imagine that there are different conversations, different angles to look at democracy in Nigeria, the way it's being practiced. And I think it's very, very important that we also highlight some of these very important nuances in this conversation. It is very important now that we understand that the nation is faced with some would say hydra-headed, but multiple-headed situation of the insecurity, poverty, unemployment, and different things on the others. You know, even at the very external level, let's say the peripheral level of saying the bilateral relations between countries, we understand Nigerians, about 1,000 of them are going to be repatriated back to the country. And that means what? It means from what we were about 250 million plus, we're going to have 250 million plus 1,000. And that means what exactly? You can tell you, we can probably get what I'm trying to say. But yeah, Falana has raised a red flag and it lists insecurity and attacks on free speech, hunger as well as threat to democracy. Do you believe in what the senior advocate of Nigeria has said? If you do, please drop it in the comment box and let's have your reaction to that conversation. Says it may undermine credibility of general elections. That's exactly the conversation as the Daily Times has put it out this morning, that Falana has said that. Meanwhile, some other stories are still making the rounds, particularly Senate queries Southeast Development Commission MD over 16 billion naira budgets. Sometimes I call money and I'm asking myself, do you know what you've just called? Because I don't, sometimes it's just so easy to call the figures. But if you have to think about it, how much of that will fill the room that you are? I mean, to start from there, just to pile the money, you understand how much it can be, because it's a lot of money. But what we've been made to see in the country is that, you know what, there's no amount that is too much, as long as you can call it, you know. And so that seems to be the situation. But Senate is querying Southeast Development Commission and their managing director over 16 billion naira budget. And the question would be, what have you done with the money? And again, that's a conversation we must really check into as well. Now, moving on from that as well, to check some other stories still making the rounds across the newspapers. This morning, the Hope newspaper has Shetima in Ekiti echoes Tinubu's tough stance against corruption. That's a story you might want to check out as well. Rep summoned service chiefs, rebuttal over rise in criminalities. That and many other stories we have on the newspapers printed on the front pages this morning. But for what of time, we have to shelf this conversation and take it on to the next conversation, which is the big story with Oluwayemi Adelakun. But that will be shortly after this break. Stay with us.